Hi everyone, my name is Anthony Costello and I'm the president of the Kirkwood Center for Theology and Ethics. I wanted to announce a new podcast series that we're undertaking here at the Kirkwood Center. For the next several weeks, we are going to be joined by two other ministries, Soul Science Ministries, founded by philosopher, theologian, and pastor Joshua Ryan Farris, and Orbis Century, co-founded by author, researcher, and evangelist Carl Teichrieb. In this series, we are going to be exploring religious, theological, and philosophical issues that we believe the church is not taking as seriously as it needs to be taken. We start with the realization that the culture has undergone a major shift in worldview, or minimally is undergoing such a shift. No longer is the main intellectual and spiritual foe of Christianity in the West the strict atheistic materialism of the early to mid 20th century. Instead, we believe, and evidence suggests, that we are coming into a new religious landscape in America, if, again, we aren't already there. But that religious landscape is not necessarily a Christian one. Already in 1938, T.S. Eliot put his finger on the cultural moment. In his lectures at Cambridge University, Eliot already was suggesting that the West was at a spiritual tipping point. Either there would be a retrieval and revivification of classical Christianity to include a reestablishment of our basic principles of law and governance in that Christian worldview, or alternatively, the West would revert back to the religion that came before the arrival of Christianity. That religion was, of course, paganism. As the saying often attributed to Chesterton goes, paganism was the biggest thing around, Christianity was bigger, and everything since has been relatively small. In this 6-part series, we are going to be dealing with topics that are emerging in the culture because, for all intent and purposes, it really looks like paganism has indeed gotten big again, and that Eliot's prediction has come true. And so over the next several weeks, we will be discussing this return to religion, to spirituality, to magic and occult, and several particular topics that relate to each. We hope that you will enjoy these videos and share them with your friends and colleagues at church, at your school or seminary, and help us to prepare to engage with the culture as we now find it. If you enjoy these videos, we encourage you to click and hit the subscribe button, and also leave us a comment or even reach out to us if you find something here that fills a need for you or your church's community. In this very first episode, Joshua Farris, Carl Teichrieb, and myself talk about this shift in cultural worldview and the need for the church to shift its focus from apologetically and theologically to meet this new age order, and to try and answer the questions that it is raising about truth and reality. Again, we hope you enjoy this. Please leave us a comment, and we'll see you soon.
For much of the last century, Christian apologetics oriented itself around a single dominant opponent, disbelief or unbelief. The assumed task was to defend faith against skepticism, naturalism, and the slow erosion of belief under the weight of modern science and secular reason. That framework made sense until it didn't. What we're witnessing now is not a culture that has stopped believing, but one that has begun believing again, only differently. Spiritual hunger has not disappeared. It has migrated, you might say. Across the West, we see a renewed interest in paganism, at least a new version or new versions of paganism, New Age spirituality, occult practices, altered states of consciousness, and alternative cosmologies, often braided together with the language of psychology, pseudoscience, wellness, politics. And so this series, we're going to be diving into several of these issues through three distinct but complementary vantage points: From the Kirkwood Center, we gain a careful, historically informed, and academically serious analysis of contemporary paganism, post-Christian movements, and spiritual frameworks. From Orbis Century, we find and we're given on-the-ground research into New Age movements, spiritual networks, and we encounter these beliefs as they're actually lived now, practiced and propagated in real time. And from Soul Science Ministries, we ask the deeper theological and anthropological questions. What does this return to spirituality reveal? What does it tell us about the human person, about the soul, about our irreducibly religious nature, and what that points us to? What's the meaning? Together, these conversations aim to diagnose the moment honestly, not with fear, not with nostalgia, but with theological clarity, seriousness, and pastoral realism. If apologetics is to remain faithful and effective, it must reckon with the fact that we're no longer addressing a secular world or a secular void, but a crowded spiritual marketplace. Good to be with you guys. Maybe we could just go around first before we begin framing some questions and having some discussion, general questions, and then I'll ask more specific questions of each of you from your own areas of specialty. Let's go around and maybe introduce ourselves. Tell us about the ministry, what you do, and the like.
Yeah, my name's Anthony Costello, and I'm the president of the Kirkwood Center for Theology and Ethics. It's a ministry I started a few years back with some colleagues from Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. And the need that we saw was to continue to work to connect Christian scholarship to the local church. So that's been our main focus. But in recent years, we've also realized that there seems to be a gap in academic engagement with certain areas of culture. And most of us studied theology, philosophy, and apologetics, and we're familiar with kind of the traditional engagements with, as you put in your introduction, skepticism, unbelief, scientific materialism, and atheism. But we felt that there were other topics now popping up that were sort of becoming more dominant in the culture, and we've tried to focus on them and start to develop maybe not new, but better apologetical and theological responses to what the culture seems to be, the questions the culture seems to be raising. And one of those areas, and this is why we, wanted to do this series together, has been the emergence or re-emergence of what looks like pagan belief and practice in the West. So we've been trying to focus on neo-paganism, New Age spirituality, occult, magic use in a lot of our written and video content. So the hope would be to sort of help realign or refocus some of our apologetic and theological engagement in the church on these areas. That's a little bit about the Kirkwood Center. Yeah.
Excellent.
Excellent. Thank you, Anthony. And my name is Carl Teichert, and I'm the Director of Worldview Research at Orbis Century. Orbis Century is a fairly new organization, just started last year with my friend George Olson, as we examine worldview trends and analyze major movements, spiritual, and how they fit into the realm of politics and culture. And we're looking to engage Christians, educate Christians so that they can be effective ambassadors for Christ, not engaging necessarily in the culture war, but rather to be diplomats to engage in cultural diplomacy, actually coming forward with reasonable responses to the challenges of our age, not simply reactionary talking points, which is what we typically see, of course, on social media. I've been engaged in researching and trying to understand worldview trends, both from their political and from their religious point of view, since the early 1990s, and doing this full-time since 1997. My role has been over the last number of years to help other ministries and organizations wrestle with and grapple with the trends, spiritual religious trends, and how they impact a broad range of other areas, from politics to technology to culture itself. I'm the author of the book Game of Gods, The Temple of Man and the Age of Re-enchantment. And in a sense, I guess what I'm best known for is I'm going to the places where these worldviews are unfolding in real time and in real action. And that includes attending pagan events, going to Burning Man, going to the Parliament of World Religions. I used to spend a considerable amount of time working through the geopolitical expressions of this spiritual intellectual change, going to United Nations events, and even this last year attending a NATO event. So it's a variety of different roles, but all looking at it from the perspective of how is the world changing, and the emergence of a new way of thinking through what humankind is supposed to look like, what we're supposed to be, and the shift over to the realm of re-enchantment, away from modernity to something more grounded in a spiritual feeling or sensibility rather than the pure secularist mode. In a sense, we look at secularism, and I look at secularism as kind of a stopgap, an in-between period or a pause between how Jacques Ellul would describe it as one religious system, dominant system, being replaced by another. And we are now in the throes of a spiritual smorgasbord where we have many, many options, and we are moving definitely into a different spiritual context than the secularist hypothesis.
Good. Yeah, thank you guys. Yeah, I think, this kind of worked out quite naturally, actually. Soul Science Ministries exists as a kind of counterculture engagement at the intersection of consciousness, where right now we're seeing a lot of engagement with, I think we're seeing an uptick of engagement with consciousness studies and the implications of consciousness. Oftentimes, it's more so coming from worldviews, practices that are foreign to theism, Christian theism, and we're seeing a lot more gurus pop up and discussing the implications of consciousness. But it seems to me, and this is kind of my impulse, that overlaps, I think, with both of you and what you're interested in and what we see as important for discussions going forward is the fact that Christians need to engage more, not just critically, but also constructively with the resources around them and the kinds of information that is out there that's actually being discussed in mainstream culture and that's seeping into mainstream culture, even if it's more subconscious. So it's something that we as the church need to do, I think, and we need to get ahead of it. So often, I mean, will we get ahead of it? Will we get ahead of the new age? I'm not sure what to call it. The new age. I mean, the new age was really big in like the 70s and 80s, and now it's coming back around in a kind of new variations. Maybe it looks a little different, but it's coming around again, and with especially in light of AI and AI discussions, technology, and so these are really live. And I just saw. Ian McGilchrist is talking about some of the issues regarding AI and consciousness right now. There's just in a couple of weeks. Well, that should be fascinating. But anyway, I say all that to say, just to frame it, to say that this was a natural kind of this naturally worked out, where we're all kind of interested in these sets of issues. We see needs that these discussions need to take place. We need to move forward with these discussions. And so we're going to try to make good on that and try to chip away and have a conversation about it. I certainly have a lot to learn, and this is something that has intrigued me, and it overlaps with a whole host of issues, as we mentioned privately when we discussed about the new kind of emerging interests, again, in different overlapping kind of moods and attitudes within the culture right now. Interests in psychedelic religious experiences, a seeming uptick of interest, not just in cultic activity, but occultic activity, demonology, oppression, and all sorts of other things that seem to be overlapping with these wider sets of issues. And I've been reading, Carl, your book. It's good. I've been working through it, and I'm still working through it. I'll probably continue working through it over the next couple of months as we have further discussions. And Anthony, you've recently haven't you written a book on neo-paganism?
So I was contacted by the campus ministry Ratio Christi, which is I think they even have ministry outlets in other countries, but they're on several campuses throughout the United States. And it's an apologetics-oriented ministry, kind of like Campus Crusade, but more, intellectually engaged with campus life. And they have a series of short, it's called a Novum series, short little apologetics, I'd almost call them manuals or booklets, that they're producing or have been producing over the last couple of years. And they wanted one on neo-paganism. So I wrote that booklet for them. It's just short. It's about 34 pages long, but that has now motivated me to write a lengthier treatment of contemporary paganism and the need for a commensurate Christian response. So I'm in the middle of that project right now with a major publisher.
Excellent.
So yeah, that's taking up most of my intellectual energy right now. And Carl's book was also an inspiration for me to continue to engage on this. It wasn't, I came to this issue through my studies on critical theory, which is kind of a story in itself, where I started to realize that in some of the critical theory literature and the critical legal studies literature in the 1990s and early 2000s, there were hints of something like a pantheistic kind of ontology that was being proposed as an alternative to the theistic or Christian theistic basis for law and jurisprudence, right? So that sort of led me onto this track of like thinking, paganism is just kind of coming back, and then I found Carl's book, and I was like, it's not only coming back, it's been here for some time. So, that's what I'm working on right now. And yeah, I wrote a short book for Ratio Christi, and I'm in the middle of the longer treatment of that right now. Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, I'd like to work through the both works, maybe your short one.
That shouldn't take you more than a few hours, I think.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Very
it's only
good.
about 34 pages, but yeah.
Oh, 34. That's easy. Yeah. Carl's is about 600 pages. Is that right?
Carl's got a lot more footnotes. But I will rival Carl's footnotes in my forthcoming.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. Very good.
That's my goal, actually, is just to rival Carl's the length of his footnotes. Yeah.
Excellent.
I was just going to say, I'm looking forward to it, Anthony. I actually really am looking forward to your book. I'm hoping it's going to shake up the Christian community to realize the proximity of the neo-pagan world and how it has its influence is already evident. It's already here.
Yeah. Well, and Joshua, you made the point in your last what you just said recently about whether or not we can get ahead of the new age or catch up, and it made me think of something Francis Schaeffer alluded to in several of his books, that theology, Christian theology, is always sort of the last discipline to catch up to where the culture's at. And I don't know if that's by divine providence. Maybe God wants us to act in faith first, and then have the intellectual resources catch up later. But it does seem like we are again, in a sense, behind on if you think of the church's intellectual output, it's been dedicated. We think in the West, at least, in America, it's been dedicated to sort of combating, the atheistic materialism of the late 19th and early 20th centuries for so long now.
Yeah.
That Carl mentioned Jacques Ellul, that we sort of lost track of the basic truism that man is a believing man, right? Man is homo religiosus, and that behind the scenes, I think people have always had the spiritual thirst, and now we're just sort of catching up to where the culture has already been for at least since the 1960s. So I think that too has been one focus of mine, and Carl's especially as well, in trying to raise awareness in the church that, look, this is already there, and we need to start, engaging intellectually with the neo-pagan world.
Right. Yeah. I think so. I think that's the kind of the impulse or the motivation for this this whole series. It's the sense I think that we all share, the impulse or the sense that we all share that effectively, if the apologetics movement is going to continue and do good and hopefully shape the people in the pews and the churches a bit more as they are navigating this terrain and how it's changing, then there needs to be maybe some shift in apologetics. Maybe we could talk about this or unfold this a bit more, what we mean by this kind of shift in the apologetics movement. I think what we said was something like, in the apologetics world, like you said, Anthony, it's been really focused on kind of some sort of naturalistic view, even more locally, kind of a more physicalistic or materialistic view of the world, where everything is kind of explained by these sorts of this sort of closed system of causes and effects in the natural realm, and so that certainly kind of excluded the kind of the picture of kind of a theistic universe that maybe older views had or older in history, so. We've had a lot of the apologetics, which is really focused on kind of the rationality of theism or the evidence for theism, and kind of the pushback against the kind of naturalistic worldview or even secular worldview where God is not even really in the picture at all. And now, things seem to be changing. I think maybe we could speak to that a bit more too, where the landscape is changing. I think we've all sensed this, that there's a trend here that's moving away from naturalism or secularism even itself as being a very plausible way of looking at the world, engaging with the world. There's lots of reasons, I think, from consciousness for thinking that worldview is just not satisfactory. It doesn't have a lot of plausibility or explanatory resources or power. And, it's actually at one level, it's like, we should be moving on from this. It's kind of boring. Like we need to, the New Age movement is actually far more fascinating, intriguing as an intellectual kind of project. And obviously we reject it, but, because we're theists and we're Christians. But at another level, whilst we may reject it even on the surface, the level to which it kind of has influenced or maybe even shaped our Christian circles seems to be around, and so we need to be aware of it somehow, right? We need to be, I guess, raise awareness. It sounds alarmist, but maybe it is a bit alarming. I think we need to be critical. I would also add a constructive piece as well. Apologetics needs to be more constructive.
Yeah.
But, so what do you think? Are we moving beyond kind of secularism, atheism, And are we moving into something like a cultural landscape that is more post-secular now? What do you think about that? What do you guys think?
I would suggest that we've actually been in it
Go
for
ahead,
quite
Carl. Why don't
some
you
time.
start?
Yeah. I was just going to say, I suggest that we probably have been in a movement like this for some time, at least since the 1960s. Our Christian apologetic community, our church context, you're absolutely right, Joshua. We have focused more on that secularist component, the issue of non-belief. Or from the realm of apologetics, we've focused on, let's say, the pseudo-Christian cults, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, that type of thing. We've stayed within those more conservative ways of looking at apologetics. At the same time, there's been a whole new stream of thinking, experiences, and teachings that have come right through the middle that we more or less have ignored, and that we are no longer capable of ignoring it because it's in our laps. And that, of course, is that neo-pagan context, which really spins up in a significant way in the 1960s, early 1970s, and is fully operating by the 1990s, and even significantly impacting geopolitics. But we were not aware of it. It wasn't just simply an issue of us not being aware. It wasn't even on the radar. We weren't thinking along those lines. We were thinking in terms of secularism, or we were thinking of working within the Christian cult community, the pseudo-Christian cults, Mormons, that type of thing. So we've had this entire stream of cultural change unfold literally beneath our feet. And we're only starting in the last 15 years, beginning to wrestle with what that looks like. Others have been in the space working on that already in the 1990s, but for the most part, the voices were more marginalized because they were talking about things that for the most part, the Christian world would look at and go, oh, that's over there. That's like super, super fringe. But it never was fringe, especially by the fact that it actually lands in the realm of geopolitics already in the early 1970s and builds into it already at that stage. And so when it's hitting geopolitics, I look at that as one of those benchmarks to say it's landed firmly in the culture. If we're talking about it politically, especially geopolitically, it's no longer fringe. And I take a look at the environmental movement of the 1970s, and then hitting it hard with the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, where you are seeing literally a type of pagan politics infused within the conversation. And it's raw, and it's there, and how do we ignore it? Well, it just simply passed by us because our focus was elsewhere. And I don't think it was intentional.
Yeah.
It wasn't intentional on our part. The focus was simply elsewhere.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know, Anthony, I know you want to jump in on here on this question. I want to, that just raised several different questions, and without getting too specific on, with specific information, it makes me think of, several things. One, I've been thinking about transhumanism. Jenny Huberman wrote a great sociological book of transhumanism, and I'm sure there are, maybe without getting too specific, I'm sure there's general confluences or connections between that and paganism, and then also the New Age. But then you have in geopolitics, you also have this strand of kind of powerhouse, what would you call it? Powerhouse humanism. It's transhumanism, or not posthumanism, but transhumanism, and the likes of that famous. I've read at least two of his books. He's kind of on the Davos Report, a part of that that large globalist group. I'm blanking on his name right now. You know who I'm talking about.
The German Schwab?
Schwab is a part of that same group, and this is the Harvard historian who wrote the book on the future of humanity. Thick book.
Okay.
Novel Harari.
Oh,
Harari.
Yeah,
Yuval Harari.
right.
Yes,
Okay,
right. I mean, he's still operating, just to think. I mean, this is all very complicated. He's still operating, though, in a much more kind of secularistic, atheistic kind of, almost new atheistic kind of frame of mind. And he sees technology as the way forward, taking us forward. He's talking about like spiritual themes now, but he doesn't seem to be talking in the way that, say, a lot of New Age gurus are talking about the world around us, like that famous Bernardo Kastrup and kind of his mentor, the famous New Age guru who's published all over the world and spoken all over the world. Yuval Harari.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just put that out there to think about, because like it seems like materialism is still around. And transhumanism seems to be kind of embedded in a kind of robust materialism. Yeah. And then, yeah.
Well, let me make 2 points. One, adding to what Carl said about, this has been there since the New Age spirituality, neo-paganism, a reconstructed and intentionally reconstructed paganism that comes over from, especially from Britain in the 1960s with the 20th century magicians. And I'm not talking about magicians in the David Copperfield sense, but, we're talking about people who at least believed that they were practicing actual magic, interacting with the spiritual realm, the Aleister Crowleys and Gerald Gardners of the world, Gardner being the father of contemporary Wiccan belief and practice, and that gets literally brought over to America. I don't know if it was the Bucklands, but they were certainly integral in that process of bringing contemporary witchcraft over to American shores. And it's not to say that witchcraft and neo-paganism are exactly the same thing, but they're closely related. We could do a Venn diagram or something. But I want to back up. So certainly since the 1960s, we see explicit, identifiable neo-pagan groups, right, Carl, organizations, named entities and sort of covens, practices, and so on and so forth. There's certainly an uptick in that. A lot of it, again, brought over from Britain. I want to go back to this idea, though, of, there was certainly post-Enlightenment, this idea of progressing beyond religion, right? Carl opens up a lot of Game of Gods with sort of figures like Auguste Comte and this idea, and maybe John Dewey in America, where we will leave behind folk belief, right? These primitive beliefs, of which maybe Christianity was sort of the pinnacle of religious belief. But again, we're going to leave all these behind as we enter into the positivistic era, the era of scientific positivism, where we will just explain what reality is, and then no more hand-wringing over things like theology and even metaphysics, right? Okay. Max Weber, who coined the term the disenchantment of the world, the Entzauberung der Welt, right? He gives a lecture in 1919 in Munich, Germany, called The Vocation of the Scholar, where when he's talking about, and I think if one actually reads that in context, Weber is smart enough. He was a very brilliant guy. He says that religious belief, the things most meaningful to us, are not going to just disappear. They'll get segregated off into pockets of society, right? But they'll still be there. But what he's talking about is the research institute, the modern university. And the modern university is going to be the place of positivism, right? It's going to be the place where science reigns, and the philosophy of science, the analytic kind of philosophy, Joshua, that you have studied and I've studied a little bit, will sort of rule the roost, right? And I think that did occur in the English-speaking world. We talk about Anglophonic philosophy being sort of analytic philosophy, beholden to sort of a philosophical materialism, right? But I think that's a very small, I think it's a very short period of time, and it's a very small segment of society that actually operates in that mode, even if it had maybe an incommensurate influence, because it's the research universities where this kind of scientism takes hold. But at the popular level, I don't think that kind of scientism ever really filtered down in such a way as to take hold of the majority of the population. And of course, the other opponent to that scientific materialism, which I think was far more successful, and which does open the door more to religious belief, was critical theory. Critical theories were at war with the kind of scientism of the logical positivists. There was a debate between Karl Popper and Theodor Adorno in 1961, I believe, in Frankfurt. I think it was in Frankfurt, called the positivist disputes, where they argued about this. And I think critical theory was much more amenable, even though it's sort of atheistic because it's born out of Marxism, much more amenable to these existential questions of meaning and purpose, identity, et cetera, that analytic philosophy driven by scientific materialism we're willing just to, treat as third person phenomena, right? Like, dismiss all of the internal phenomena. So I think critical theory was sort of like a stepping stone back to, or at least it allowed for the religious to sort of reemerge at the universities. And I think in the 1960s, this is what you get, and you're getting it today. One colleague of mine, and friend Owen Anderson at Arizona State University has been fighting this battle now for several years. There's all kinds of neo-pagan belief and practice on big state school campus like Arizona State University. They're giving classes on not witchcraft from a anthropological view, but on how to do witchcraft and how to practice witchcraft. So I think the church, a lot of the church, again, was engaged with this very strict scientism that was sort of like ensconced in the research institutions in the English-speaking world. But I don't know that that really filtered down as much as people think.
Huh.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, yeah, I think that, that's really interesting. It makes me think, though, I mean, generally speaking, when I think about kind of the kind of scientisms of the day, I think the generation before, my generation, the boomer generation, there did, and I don't have studies right in front of me to prove this, so this is more anecdotal. But I suspect there is probably trends we could point to. But there did seem to be kind of tendencies within that generation toward kind of scientisms themselves that seem to be rooted in sort of these more high-level kind of ivory tower academic kind of naturalistic views of the world, where people are kind of just embedded in a kind of just almost neutral, secular, kind of indifferent kind of attitude about, what really matters in the world. Like, my parents in that generation seemed to trust whatever the medical doctor ever told them, because it's rooted in a kind of objectivist science that is almost infallible, at least, or at least because it's rooted, or some of the common practices they thought were rooted in, rigorous empirical science and data. And so that kind of dataism seemed to kind of permeate the kind of worldview decisions of that kind of generation. Yeah, I'm not saying that's contradicting what you're saying. I'm just saying, like, the naturalistic kind of worldview did seem to be kind of permeate and kind of prominent within previous generations. Certainly my parents' generation. Yeah.
And I think that's, yeah, well, and Carl, I want to get your, so because the universities, I think, were so beholden to that kind of materialist, impersonal materialist, rationalistic worldview. That's where that comes from primarily. And I would say, okay, that did have an incommensurate sort of effect. I don't know how numbers wise, it might be hard to say how many people really in the last 150 years have been dyed in the wool, sort of strict atheistic materialists with no religious inclinations whatsoever, et cetera, et cetera. But then too, I think, and Carl, I want to get your view on this. When it comes to the global issue, right, and the type of environmentalist movements that you get in the 60s, and we're not just talking then about the West, we're talking about the influence of Eastern countries and Eastern religions, and of course, you get Hinduism becoming more and more, there's more and more interest in Hinduism in America and even in Europe. And I think then if we take that into account as well, that might explain why, the atheistic materialist worldview, it was there. It seemed to kind of have hegemony, but I don't think that hegemony was as powerful as we think. I don't know that it has lasted really that long,
Well, okay, so this is interesting because if you want to take a look at a culture and a system that was secular and atheistic at its core, it was the Soviet Union. And Vladimir Lenin believed that because the revolution was won, that everybody would, in a sense, just automatically gravitate, rejecting Orthodox Christianity, rejecting their Christian roots, and would gravitate towards a secular atheistic perspective. That was the assumption, which is why a few years later they realized, no, it's not happening. And so they put in place the League of the Militant Godless. They put in place literally a Soviet party propaganda arm to try to, basically reinforce the atheistic element of radical socialist revolution, because the people weren't following, and they didn't. So there's sometimes this disconnect between, hey, we have entrenched atheistic secularist thought on one hand, so much so that in the case of the Soviet Union, it becomes the political benchmark. But the average person on the ground is living a different reality. And so you have this, I believe, a form of disconnect between what the visionaries sometimes see and how they're at odds with the very culture through which they're trying to, they're trying to, in essence, move towards a certain outcome or a certain worldview. By the time the 1960s comes around, and by the way, in my latest Substack article, I bring into the play the fact that I knew personally one of the architects of the modern early environmental movement at the level of global governance, international order, and specifically through the 1972 Stockholm Conference. I had in the past rubbed shoulders with Maurice Strong, who was its Secretary General and the Secretary General to the 92 Rio Conference. But more importantly, I was personal friends with Wayne Kynes, who turned out later in his life, retired and moved into my part of the country. And we ended up striking up a friendship, which kind of blew me away. Here I am, I'm in rural Manitoba, Canada. And I have a UN insider, literally one of the architects, early architects, in bringing environmentalism with a definite nature-centric principle into play, and here he is in my backyard. So we struck up a pretty interesting friendship coming from two different worldviews completely, and yet being able to talk shop at the level of global governance because of my prior involvement in going to different UN events. And what's fascinating about the early 1970s as the environmental movement is taking shape, it is about reorienting humanity towards nature. And I'm not simply saying this from the perspective of we become stewards. That's a biblical concept. That's biblical language. This, in a sense, is a reorientation at the soul level of what it means to be connected to the earth. And that really becomes the foundation of of the thought process of the day. We are not stewards of the earth. We are, in essence, how do I say this? The earth is the master, and we are the slave. You know, it boils down to something more raw, more like that. And then by the time the 1992 summit comes along, oh my goodness! If you take a look at the outcomes, here's a good example. My stars. Okay, I have the Convention on Biological Diversity because I'm actually teaching a course right now at a college where I'm touching on these things. Convention on Biodiversity, very short little document, laid out in letter-sized sheets. It's maybe 18 pages. Whip-de-doo. It doesn't, it's small. It doesn't say much, but it says a lot at the same time. Here's the first interpretation of that 18 pages. A massive, massive document on global biodiversity. When that was done, they realized they missed the point on the spiritual side. And so they have cultural and spiritual values of biodiversity. A 700-plus page, oversized document to explain 18 pages. And when you're going through it, there's poems and songs to Gaia. There is a definite nature-first perspective. Man is subservient to nature. That's how it moves. So at that level, it already forms itself into pagan politics. Because if we boil down the essence to what paganism means, from a biblical point of view, Romans 1, we recognize it as the worship of the creation rather than the creator. Hands down, that ends up where it lands. And if you talk to pagans and spend time in the pagan community, you're going to often hear that, we are a religion of nature, where the deities that we serve are symbolic and at the same time the actualization of natural processes.
I think the document he just showed was from 1992, and I think it was a UN document. So this is what politicians are doing in this context of global environmental engagement. I think that kind of shows some counter evidence to the idea that the West or the world had become purely secularized and a-religious or unreligious. And the way I've been thinking about this, and this goes back to your question about belief versus unbelief, seeming to be sort of like the main question of modernity, right? Where is there a God, or does God exist, or does God not exist, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe what was not being, or what we were missing was that there could be the question of, yes, God exists, but what we mean by God is quite different if we're on the theistic or the pantheistic side of the coin, right? And maybe one way to think now about the types of worldview that we're engaging with, because one thing that I think we could point out is the ontologically speaking, the atheistic materialist and the pantheist don't have much disagreement. I mean, there's only one thing, matter or nature or the material world. Now, there'll be disagreements when you get more fine-grained on that. Yeah. But I've been, one thing I'm thinking is it's the way that matter is interpreted. It's sort of like a hermeneutic that is lens that is the difference maker. How the pantheist interprets or sees matter as opposed to the physicalist or materialist, that atheist materialist, that's very different, right? And it's almost like whether the question is not maybe one of disbelief in God or unbelief, but how do we interpret matter? Is matter personal or is matter impersonal? And if matter is interpreted as personal, then you have a pantheist or a pagan kind of worldview. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it does make sense. Sure. I think there's been a lot of talk and kind of murmurings about the uptick of interest in spiritual things, spirituality in recent years. There was a Cornell University study, and I think recently in in the national study, it shows that the millennials, says the millennials are turning their backs on traditional religious institutions, but they're continuing nonetheless to search for spirituality. And so some have interpreted that as well, there's a move away from kind of certainly traditional institutional religion, which was prompted or motivated by kind of maybe disagreements, disgruntledness with those, but also prompted in some ways by a dissatisfaction with humanism, like the humanism of old or atheistic humanism of the early 1900s, but still groping for something else. Like you hear that kind of narrative. Yeah, what do you make of that? What do you make of the uptick in discussion about there seems to be an uptick of spiritual interest. There seems to be a kind of uptick of spiritual hunger. People are still searching for meaning. Yeah, and then I'll come back. I got a follow-up related question to that.
Okay. So it's kind of when did this term, the nuns, start becoming popular? Like maybe 10, 15 years ago, the rise of the nuns, Nones.
Yes. Or the spiritual but not religious.
Spiritual but not religious. And I would say, from my end, as part of personal testimony, that I had a very clear spiritual but not religious phase when I was leaving high school at university in the 1990s. I grew up Catholic in a conservative and devout Roman Catholic home, and I went through certainly a phase of sort of like I still maintained a Catholic identity because that's what my family was and my family's family and so on and so forth. But I was much more open to alternative spiritualities. And, one wonders too, if technology does have some role in this, as people are opened to more and more information about other worldviews and other religions and other global practices around the world than in prior generations, right? At some point in the 1990s, everybody starts to have a personal computer. We all now on the internet, we have email, we have websites that we can visit, and we're not as restricted anymore. It's not like we have to go to the library to find out about Buddhism or Hinduism or even secular humanism, right? So we're all of a sudden exposed to a lot more kinds of beliefs than the ones we grew up with and the ones that were predominant. The one that was predominant in the culture, Judeo-Christian worldview. So I do think technology plays a role in that. 1990s, everybody's on the computers now. It's at school. So it doesn't have to just come through some sociology professor per se. You can get it yourself. You can get into it yourself. And one thing that I've noticed in my studies on witchcraft, contemporary witchcraft, is a lot of witchcraft covens and just material was propagated on the early internet. There was a disproportionate number of people who became neo-pagans or who were neo-pagans who were online early, right? This is sort of like a fact in the recent history of contemporary witchcraft, that this is how a lot of witchcraft information and practice was disseminated. So I think again, so that's sort of the information piece. We all of a sudden find ourselves far more aware of alternative beliefs to the ones that we grew up with, or that were predominant and that predominant in the culture, just via technology. So I think that plays a big role in that rise of the nuns, because, you know, especially as young people, I do believe in this natural rebellious tendency around the age of 15, 16, 17 to want to intellectually question and challenge the beliefs that we grew up with. That might be something more easier to do in the Western context than maybe in other cultures in the East. But so I don't think it seems, it doesn't seem terribly shocking to have something like that, the rise of the nuns or the spiritual not religious, when you consider sort of the age group that you're dealing with and the new technology that they were presented with. Right.
Yeah.
Because, you know, and this was something I think when I was doing apologetics, somebody had talked about something Dallas Willard had once said about maybe not thinking you have to teach apologetics at a local church, but you have to sort of gauge, and I'm paraphrasing very loosely here, you got to sort of gauge the church or the group you're dealing with. Maybe they need apologetics, maybe they don't. Maybe you don't necessarily need to introduce all of the questions about the historical evidences for the resurrection of Jesus or arguments for or against the existence of God, because that might just introduce something into a congregation that they don't really need, right? And it might actually make things worse. But I think Willard said that, or said something like that, before the internet. You know, now with the kind of technology we have and the interconnectedness we have and just the easy flow of information, good and bad information, I think it's very hard to prevent this sort of epistemic crisis from occurring, that you're just going to be hit. Every young person is going to be hit with the panoply of religious alternatives to their own, or to that of their parents. I don't know. Is that? I think that's one possible explanation.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. I think that's probably likely. Yeah, of course, we've been exposed much more. I mean, TV kind of exposed us much more to different aspects of the world earlier in history, which gave us kind of access to challenges in other parts of the world, third world countries that we had more kind of experiential access to through the news, but also internet, even much more so, gave us greater access and information to worldview patterns and practices than we had before, which have kind of just multiplied kind of the options. So would you say the generations that we're in right now, contemporarily, we're not seeing a loss of religion. We're actually seeing something else. Is that what you're suggesting?
So I'm positing that man is religious, right, as sort of an anthropological stance and also a biblical stance, right? But as far as like, I'm no sociologist of religion. I know there are a handful of pretty good Christian sociologists out there who are sort of looking into questions like the landscape, you know, what is the contemporary landscape by the numbers of religious belief and so on and so forth. You know, and it may be the case that we can't really know that right now as well. Because I don't know how, but you know more than anybody, beliefs are tricky things to sort of measure, gauge, or quantify over.
Yeah.
So I would say I think there's evidence that people are more interested, and there are actually more people claiming to be pagan, and claiming some particular type of paganism. Okay, it's not, the numbers aren't huge, all right, but they're increasing, especially in the West, right, in America and in parts of Europe. Okay. So that would now I'm not going to say that there are no true atheists in the world either. I believe Richard Dawkins is an atheist, that he doesn't, not only does he not believe that God exists, but he's not a pantheist either. He doesn't believe that matter is personal, or that the universe has some kind of intrinsic meaning, or some kind, or some kind of telos or purpose other than the propagation of biological organisms, right? So I think there are still plenty of atheists of that sort in the culture, and still many in prominent positions of influence as well, like maybe Yuval Harari and others. But I think, I think we would all say, again, and it's kind of related to the online culture, that we all have a sense that there is an increasing interest in religion in general and spirituality, whether it be the phenomenon of Jordan Peterson, for example, or some of these more prominent celebrity conversions that we've seen over the past 10 years. The religious, let's say the religious discussion is back on the in the public marketplace of ideas, right? It's back on the table. We're not, this idea that we're not going to talk religion and politics, right? Like we are. And almost out of like this impulse that we really need to talk religion, right? Because we have this sense that it has always been there, and we've almost been shoving it down or shoving it to the side. So, so I mean, that's my read. I think at the end of the day, I'll probably just say a safe bet would be say we're living in a pluralistic culture. There's no one dominant religious or even a religious worldview right now. It's a mix of many different things, as you said. But the religious question or the religious discussion is definitely back on the table.
Maybe I could say three different things that are related. One, it seems to me that you're suggesting maybe that this kind of loss of religion narrative isn't quite right. This idea of kind of disproving disbelief, like, is not kind of the prominent narrative that's in the water, as it were, even in Western society. And this kind of narrative that I guess secularism has been kind of has held a lot of sway, maybe even in our Western world in America, and for the last maybe 50 years or so. Such that I think this is helpful for clarifying, and maybe we can chip away at this even more here and in later discussions. But I mean, I'm kind of operating out of this, in even the way I'm framing some of the questions, operating out of a kind of sense that the kind of secularism was a bit more prominent, maybe in Western society. I don't have a number to give to it, but it's a bit more prominent. And so this is why apologetics was moving in the way that it was to provide rational grounds, right, for theistic belief and for motivating religious belief, because there was kind of a stronger sentiment that there may not be a God. I mean, so I'm thinking, like, for example, like, lots of things come to mind. I wrote an article for Christianity Today. It's a theological world, after all. And in the 60s, you had this God is dead movement, which seemed to impact secular society in the West. And then you had, certainly you had the unseating of kind of theological authority after that. I mean, you never saw a theologian on the Times magazine after that. Whereas before, I mean, you had what, Barth and you had other apparently great theologians, even Roman Catholic theologians on Times Magazine. But after that, I don't think you did. Theological loss its kind of authority in the West. It was ceded by kind of some kind of scientism, arguably, maybe sociology. And then you had you had, even in the academic centers, you had this legal precedent for treating biblical text or revelatory texts as effectively literary devices or historically interesting. So you could have classes on that, but not like proper theology like you have in like Germany. Wolfhart Pannenberg was like strongly motivating this idea that theology is a serious discipline. It's an academic discipline, even a science at one level. So I'm just saying all that. I think I'm wondering if, maybe you're right. I think there's a lot to what you're saying that it seems right as well. I think I've operated with the assumption that maybe secularistic atheism had a bit more sway in our earlier history than maybe I'm mistaken. And this also, I mean, there's this narrative going around that a lot more people are kind of more attracted to kind of spirituality as well as demonism and the demonic, and there seems to be an uptick in like oppression, spiritual oppression, demonic infestation, or even demonic oppression, demonic possession. So there's a lot of talk about this now as well. It seems that's gone up. That's been an uptick, which would seem to be a counter to what would otherwise be a kind of a cultural trend toward secularism and kind of the dampening of kind of the awareness of the demonic and the like. So you have this kind of narrative and these discussions taking place as well. Yeah.
Well, I did watch the entire episode you did with Roger Olson.
Oh, good.
On this topic.
Oh, you did? Cool.
Yeah, I did. So I know some of the things you just said. You're pointing out about theologians being seen as authorities prior to maybe the 1960s. Then all of a sudden, nobody's going to be running to the theologian for advice on much of anything.
Right.
After that,
pastors, like they used to. Pastors used to have authority, right?
Right. I'm not going to discount that what I'm calling scientism or scientific materialism, that kind of strict A.J. Ayers, maybe Quine,
Bertrand Russell.
Although I think Russell gets a little spooky towards the end, but
that's true. He does. Yeah. That's true. He does. Yeah, he does.
Well, because you never know at the end of the day what these guys' personal lives, we got their writings, but
he toyed with mysticism, of course,
yeah.
all the time. Yeah. I mean, some kind of mysticism.
Which is interesting to think about what's going on there at the personal level. So I think you do have a narrative that has evidence for it that of a kind of strict scientific materialism seemed to have a great amount of influence in the English-speaking world, at least, and other parts of Europe. But I think, we're almost saying it was fairly short-lived in a sense. If, we want to say maybe it had its heyday in the 40s and 50s. But again, we're talking, Carl's giving a pretty detailed history of like from the 60s onward, 60s, 70s, 80s, all of these kind of spiritual approaches to global political questions at very high levels of governance and legal jurisprudence. And they're not coming at these questions from this kind of pure sort of atheistic worldview. They're not.
Yeah. A good example of that is the role of the Esalen Institute in the 1960s.
Yeah.
So the Esalen Institute is blending It's engaged in blending humanistic psychology, human potential, psychedelic spirituality, Eastern mysticism, and all of this is converging in one location as you have maverick theologians going to soak in the hot tubs and hang out with buddies who, I guess they become buddies from the Department of Defense, university professors, countercultural insiders, and they're all there together exchanging and interacting and, in a sense, cross-pollinating ideas across multiple disciplines, including spirituality and what we would consider to be secularism. And it's this incredible mashup of sorts that acts as the intellectual engine for the counterculture, but has a profound effect upon educators, policymakers. I mean, even the U.S. Army's motto, "Be all you can be," which came out of the 1980s, was a direct result of sitting in the hot tubs at Esalen.
Yeah,
and yet at the same time, Esalen was giving us psychedelic spirituality, bringing the gurus from the east to the west, at least in terms of their worldview, their perspective, their teachings. And so you have examples where this bridging is taking place in the 60s, 70s, and it continues to this day. I look at my time attending Burning Man and seeing the same kind of milieu at play, where Burning Man is both secular and spiritual, material and mystical, and it all comes together and kind of coalesces in this bizarre experience that nobody can really quantify, but it's all there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. What was this group what is this group you're referring to?
Oh, the Esalen Institute, which really connects deeply. Yeah, which connected really deeply with Stanford. In the 70s and 80s, they were a back channel between American diplomats and Soviet diplomats, acted as a really interesting back channel that way, played a huge role. Their worldview was definitely a onist worldview, to the point where Mikhail Gorbachev himself found influence through what was being lectured and being discussed at Esalen, and really probably bugged the place. In fact, he made motions towards that. And so perestroika and glasnost itself ends up having almost little fingers in the Esalen experience as they are playing back and forth with each other. And it's not surprising that the Esalen Institute, one of its main players, ends up becoming the Gorbachev Foundation's president. So, my goodness, there's so many interplays between this world of what we would consider to be New Age spirituality, because that's what Esalen was playing with. But it was doing more than that. It was engaged within the realm of politics and what we would consider to be secular humanist pursuits along the lines of different branches of thought with psychology, the human potential movement. Mm-hmm. But it's mashing it up and giving us all of a sudden a brand new way of looking at the world. And that's what I think makes this era that we're in kind of difficult to really nail down and categorize. We call it postmodern, or we would call it re-enchanted. And some people will argue, oh, this is just an extension of modernity. We're in this point of flux. And you're seeing spirituality all of a sudden intersecting with secularism. It's a bizarre landscape that we find ourselves. When you start hearing, atheists, when I'm at Burning Man, a great example is I'm doing surveys, worldview surveys. One of the questions that I had is the Earth fundamentally alive? That's, you agree strongly, agree somewhat, or neutral, disagree, or disagree strongly. Everybody that in my worldview categories on my survey said I'm an atheist. All of them, and I do mean all of them, said yes, the Earth is fundamentally alive. What? I thought you were a hardcore atheist. Now you're into the realm of a type of global mythology.
I want to add, so by the way, Carl, you probably know this. Joshua, Esalen is still around. I looked it up. Yeah, I looked it up recently. I thought I might book a hot house to go up there. It's not that far up the road from me, but right. Yeah, no, it's still there. And Carl, when I read in the book the connection between the Soviets, Gorbachev in particular, and Esalen, it kind of blew my mind. I got to say, it really did. I've referenced that in several articles, that connection.
Hey, when Esteban outmaneuvers the Brookings Institute, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, when it outmaneuvered, I believe, the Council of Foreign Relations to host Yeltsin's travels to America for the first time, bringing over this, here we have the head of Russia coming over, and it's Esteban that does it, not these other major players in the realm of foreign affairs, but in this nebulous little enclave of where we marry and wed together spirituality and secularism. Yeah, Esteban was an absolute major player, not even behind the scenes. They were front and center, but for the most part just ignored because it's weird hippie stuff. That's how we, the church, that's one of the other interesting side notes to this is the church's response was always, oh, a bunch of dirty hippies, a bunch of weirdo hippies. Hello. They all put on business suits and are now, in essence, retaining that worldview while they're in positions of influence, power, and prestige. I mean, they're writing your software. We're using their apps.
Especially in the tech field. Especially, we were talking a little bit about the early history of witchcraft, online witchcraft, where you remember Margot Adler, in drawing down the moon, she notices an incommensurate number of neo-pagans and magic users in the tech fields in Simi Valley and Silicon Valley and stuff. So,
100%.
Not just, they may be college dropouts, but that doesn't mean they haven't been super successful in their business or tech or political careers. Two other things at the level of at the philosophical level that I might add, and Carl just referenced Teilhard de Chardin, and I think too, it's like, there have been competing philosophical constructs to scientism that have also been influential, and one of them has been process theology, and I don't think a lot of us in the conservative evangelical world countenance how much Hegel and his children have influenced Western culture. Hegel's process philosophy becomes the process theology of Whitehead and others, and Chardin especially. And this is, without getting into nitpicky metaphysical details, but this kind of God in process theology is also kind of very close or very amenable to a more kind of pagan theology, right? Where now the distinction between creator and creation, a transcendent God and an entirely immanent God, is extremely blurry. That line is blurred. So you can get, and I have 3 or 4 books on my desk, a kind of pagan Christianity, right? Where Christianity is construed not as a theistic religion, but as a pantheistic religion. But alongside scientism, you have these process theologies also having their influence in the 1920s and 30s with guys like the Boston Personalists on the East Coast and so on and so forth. And they had their influence as well, I think.
Are you guys saying this is kind of a continuum, more of a continuum narrative rather than, I see some narratives which are looking at the present moment and saying there seems to be more discontinuity between now and some of the previous generations in American Western society. But what I hear, maybe you're saying, and maybe there's some middle path here, middle kind of way of understanding all this, but it's certainly a mashup, but there's more continuum, maybe in terms of our cultural moment in conversation with our recent historical moments and generations that have passed or are in older generations. Yeah. What do you make of what I've just said? What do you make of what I just said?
There's a continuity. There is absolutely a continuation of the. Okay, so you have different personalities, different streams of thought that crisscross. There's no question, and yet at the same time, in terms of the ideas themselves still resonate at a certain level, whether it's taking place in the 60s, 70s, or up to now. There is a continuity still of the idea. In fact, today in my lectures, we had a really interesting side conversation about how, the persons and the events, the circumstances, even the narratives, the conversations that framed the 1910s and 1920s around secularism, we see a continuity of ideas that all of a sudden it morphs and changes over time as new concepts are entered into the fray, and as culture is wrestling with the concepts themselves and how to live it out. But there still is a common, at least from a biblical point of view, a commonality, a thread that weaves it throughout. And this is the Genesis 3 problem of man, in essence, saying, I will transcend by transgressing what God says and declares. And regardless if it's secular or spiritual, it lands in that lap that, that's really, in essence, the heartbeat of the Genesis 3 problem of man's fall. If you transgress God, you are God. You carry within you now the power or the potential to be as God, because you have transgressed God himself. And that it's an interesting thing to think through, because now you see this playing in what seems to be competing ideologies, yet in essence it's still claiming that the creation, man, is in charge of our own meaning and destiny. We're the ones who dictate the reality. We're the ones who will argue in all kinds of circles about how reality is really framed, but it's now being framed in our image, not how God images it.
I see more a different kind of narrative about the present moment, like seeing the present moment as at least more optimistic. I wonder what you think about this. So. Okay, so if we are seeing some kind of uptick of spiritual yearning, spiritual kind of groping in the dark, and we're seeing more of an awareness, let's say there's a greater awareness of spirituality, the demonic, and these sorts of things. Some would see this as kind of optimistic, like, okay, there's something going on that we need to tap into in the cultural moment, and we need to sort of engage with that in a way to show that, like, positively Christianity is kind of the answer, and we need to show why Christianity is the answer. What I hear, and I think other people might hear this too, what I hear being said more so here is that actually this is all kind of reducible to, now I don't want to simplify it too much. It sounds like it's almost reducible to the same kind of problem, corruption, sin, and the permutations that we're seeing maybe in culture, if there is more of an uptick in spirituality, or if there isn't, it's kind of a self-deluded still kind of corrupted, maligned kind of or perverted version of spirituality, and so that would be a kind of a different slant, at least on the situation right now. So what do you make? Yeah.
Okay, I think I'm going to try and I wrote a couple articles on how Christians should view history, right? So I think we can say, because I think this has to do with like almost our philosophical or theological view of history itself, right? Is kind of playing out here in our discussion. Carl puts these three questions on the right on the front of, or on the back of the book, right? And Carl, you can these three questions that the book answers. Man is always seeking eternal life, to be masters of meaning and purpose, and I forget the other one. Build heaven on earth. And I think we should see that as I think this is a great way of framing our human history, how we see human history develop. These are the three. I think he put his finger on. These are the three existential questions. These are the questions of the ramifications of sin after the fall, right? So those seem to be always there. They're ever present. As Christians, we do have a sense of a linear progression of time, maybe unlike the ancient pagan world that saw time in more cyclical patterns. But at the same time, I think as Christians, we also know that there are cycles of history. So I think we kind of have both. We have the linear progression of time for us is really just when is Christ going to return and consummate all things. That I think is where we get that's our trajectory of history is, yes, we are progressing forward to a point where we are ever closer to the return of Christ. Fine. But we can also assume that there are patterns, cycles in history, because human nature doesn't really change, right? We're not critical theorists. We don't think we construct human nature, right? So human nature, given its fixed nature, we see in history repeated patterns of behavior, the most fundamental of which are the ones that Carl mentions at the outset of the book, right? So I would say that we should see any given cultural moment as what is prominent, not as what is different, almost to see like where's the focus shifted, right? And the focus has shifted towards a more spiritual interpretation of the material world. It's sort of just shifted back to that. Well, the same driving questions are now trying to be answered out of this sort of revivified spiritual worldview.
From the perspective of, let's say, apologetics, how do we look at this? Do we look at this as opportunity? Do we look at this as here is a way? Okay, we now see that the landscape has changed and is constantly in process of changing, obviously, as ideas, the ebb and flow of ideas and the consequences of those ideas. But do we see this as now opportunity? How do we engage in a culture that is gearing itself towards this mind frame, this pagan mind frame? My little group at Burning Man, that's the exact opportunity that we're looking for. And so when we set up our camp at Burning Man, the name of our camp is the Camp of the Unknown God, based out of Acts 17. And we have people who are coming to our camp specifically even hunting us down, looking for us to have conversations, because they're there looking for some sense of spirituality. We had a couple of examples just this last year. Amazing conversations as they are there searching for something. They're open about that. They're anticipating. When they attend, they are anticipating that they will have some spiritual breakthrough. Not a Christian breakthrough, but a spiritual breakthrough at some naturalistic, quasi-pagan level. That's the hope. That's the desire to find the higher self. Our job, in a weird way, is to step in between them and the goal and to offer a better one, to say, hey, we actually know the one who created you and who gives you value, meaning, and purpose. And it's not your higher self. It's the highest being, that being God, that being Yahweh. And so we look at this as opportunity, not something to be fearful of, but by understanding the background, the cultural context, even the deeper conversations, let's say at the international level, we already can anticipate where they're coming from, how they're wired.
I think the anthropological discussion here is interesting because this also raises like a question about like how do we generally view human nature and how it kind of manifests itself in history and culture right now. I mean, if you have there's lots of complicated discussions about the theology of culture in church history, about having kind of more of a pessimistic, negative view of human nature, And then, of course, on the other hand, a more optimistic view of human nature, that there are like really positive things within culture that the Christian really needs to take up and then kind of further redeem and even transform in a healthy direction. Of course, in the 60s and 70s, you had the hippie movement that was much more influenced and shaped by some kind of maybe New Age influences, not just humanism, but kind of a cosmic humanistic worldview. Neo-paganism, Wiccanism, and witches and the like. I mean, really, that seems kind of fringe a little bit, doesn't it? I mean, it seems a little fringe. I mean, when I was in my teens, I knew one Wiccan who was actually a practicing Wiccan, and but witchery seems, well, it just seems kind of fringe still. Is it really that big of a deal?
It's a good, good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. So can I answer? I'll answer the question by saying I'm right now in a town in northern Saskatchewan where I'm teaching at Nipawin Bible College. I just had a conversation this afternoon. This is only a town of about 4,500 people. This is nowhere. This is out in the middle of nowhere, which is wonderful, by the way. I love that kind of place. That's kind of where I live too, out in the middle of nowhere. And in the course of the conversation this afternoon, I've had at least two conversations where the discussion was about how certain neighbors or friends or family or members of one was a witch inside the church. And this is a small town, okay, and it's here. And the conversation is we're rubbing shoulders with them already. They're here. Had a conversation this afternoon with a lady who's going, my niece is now a witch. How do I handle this? How do I deal with it? How does the family deal with it? Our whole family is Christian, but she's turned into a witch. She's a Wiccan. She was married with a broom instead of a bouquet. She was married with wearing a cape and a black dress. And I'm like, oh, she's characterizing it. I mean, she's taking the stereotype to its limits. But okay, if this is the reality in a little town that probably none of your listeners have ever heard of, that's only 4,500 people big, on the very edges of the North Country, it's landed in your town. Yeah. So okay, I'm gonna read you something, and you tell me where you think I'm reading this from, and then you tell me how fringy this worldview is. It's a song. Okay. It's entitled "Oh Beautiful Gaia." I'll read you just a few lines from it. Oh beautiful Gaia, oh Gaia calling us home. Oh beautiful Gaia, Gaia calling us home. Soil yielding its harvest, oh Gaia calling us home. Waves crashing on granite, oh Gaia calling us home. Pine bending in windstorms, oh Gaia calling us home. And then it goes on and on and on. Loon nesting in marshland, oh Gaia calling us home, oh Gaia calling us home. Where do you think I read that from?
Well, I mean, just a gut reaction. I would say, well, this is just from some fringe witchery book that I know there's a lot of witchery books out there. I mean, we have this metaphysics section, of course, in every bookstore that we go into, and a lot of it is witchery stuff, and it seems to be growing right now. But I imagine it's probably from a mainstream writer who's got a wide listenership.
It's the largest Protestant denomination in Canada from their hymn book.
Well, what?
Yes.
What's the largest Protestant denomination?
The United Church of Canada, a combination of Methodist and Presbyterian.
Wow. Now that's just awful. That's just awful.
Well, let me top that. I'll top that with something that I did not see personally, but that made the news prominently. Made the news, especially if one is Catholic or former Catholic, and follows things that happen in and around the Vatican. In 2019, Pope Francis, at the time, Cardinal Bergoglio, his given name, held a synod in the Vatican called the Synod on the Amazon, where representatives from various churches and indigenous peoples from Peru mainly, but other parts of in that area, were invited to like a 2-week synod or symposium on Catholicism in the region. Not only was there a ritual dance in the Vatican gardens, where sacred water and dirt were poured around a tree in the Vatican garden, and then there was a planting of a tree. But at the final, and then this was also, there was an infamous event that occurred where some effigies of Pachamama, who's the local goddess for the region, were put in a side altar at the Church of Santa Maria Transpontina. And some Austrian Catholics, 2 young guys, saw that these effigies of Pachamama had been put in the altar. They got on a morning train from Vienna, or late night train, got it to Rome at around 6 o'clock in the morning, quietly went into the church when it was open. They didn't break in, but the church was open to the public. They went in, grabbed the effigies with almost Protestant zeal, grabbed the effigies out of the side altar and threw them into the Tiber River. Now that Pope Francis apologized to the representatives from Peru for this transgression by these Austrian Catholics. And then at the final mass held, I believe it was at St. Peter's, during the presentation of the elements, which of course this is the center point of Catholic liturgical theology, is the presentation of the elements of the bread and the wine and the blessing of that transubstantiates the bread and the wine into the literal body and blood of Christ. Along with the presentation of the elements, there was a pot of sacred dirt that had been from the Amazon region that had been brought over. It was brought up by an indigenous woman in her full indigenous garb, placed on the altar together with the bread and wine, and it stayed there. It wasn't presented before the altar like the way other offerings like money or the tithes are usually put before the altar. It was put on the altar next to the elements, and it stayed there the rest of the Mass, even after the act of transubstantiation had occurred. Now, if that, from a Catholic perspective, if that is not a commingling of creator and creation, a confusion of creator and creation, then I don't know what would be. So just to add to that idea that, of syncretism. Now, I wanted to say one thing about the witchcraft, though, Joshua, because the question was about how, is witchcraft really still a thing? I think the way we should see this historically is witchcraft seems fringe because Christianity has been so successful, right? But if we go back in time, if we go back to the biblical times, witchcraft is not fringe. Witchcraft is standard practice for all ancient people groups. All pre-global Christian mission people groups. Witchcraft is religious practice. It's part and parcel of religious practice and contemporary pagans will sort of pride themselves in saying, look, we have the original, before Christianity came on the scene.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
this is what human beings did, right? Yeah. We're the original religion in that sense. So, yeah, it's fringe from a Christian perspective, certainly. But
I mean, I shouldn't be surprised at one level. I mean, they've been tinkering. I mean, Australia tinkered with the Anglican prayer book, which in pretty fundamental ways, taking out the when it came to the marriage liturgy or when it came to the ordination liturgy, they kind of explicitly took out Ephesians 5 language, which has always been a part of the marriage liturgies, and the gender distinctions have always been a part of it in terms of making sense of what it is that is marriage Christianly. And so I guess it shouldn't be surprising when you start having more goddess worship. I mean, I guess these things kind of seem to me to be related.
And then I think, Joshua, it's important. It's important from the perspective of worldview. So I'll give you an example. I mean, there's one thing to say this is classic paganism, or this is neo-paganism in today's culture or context. But then there's a worldview element of paganism. And then, for an example, I mean, I read you "O Beautiful Gaia" from a Christian hymn. I would argue it's actually not a Christian hymn anymore, or a hymnal. It just isn't. I mean, sorry,
yeah.
you've totally crossed the line. From at least a worldview perspective, they would never proclaim that they were pagans or that they were Wiccans, because they're not. But in terms of the worldview, you firmly landed in it. When I was at the Parliament of World Religions in 2015, I sat through a workshop led by some of the more well-known Wiccans in the pagan community, and the workshop was asking the question of Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment. Because in 2015, that's when his famous encyclical, was published. So they read sections of their own pagan declarations, and then they read sections from the encyclical without telling us which was which. And then they asked the question, who published which? And the bottom line was, as pagans, they were going, and they recognized, yeah, Pope Francis would still believe in a transcendent God. He still believes in a Christian deity, a Christian God. But from a worldview perspective, fundamentally, we've already cross-pollinated ideas deeply.
Yeah. You know, I want to add to that, Joshua, a theological and a historical theological point that might interest the audience. Pope Francis took the name Francis for a reason. Francis of Assisi is a saint, and I would consider him a saint of the church even as a Protestant, a saintly man. But he is a favorite sort of religious figure for a lot of neo-pagans to reference in the literature, because he has these canticles to the sun and the moon, and we have all the images of him with the animals around him and everything else. So Pope Francis did flirt very intimately with the environmentalist community and the neo-pagans and earth worshippers therein. There's a 2016 documentary made by the famous German filmmaker Wim Wenders, where you can see they had this Earth Day celebration right in St. Peter's Square, and in laser lights up on the cupola of St. Peter's, they put up Mother Earth First. Was right there on the cupola of St. Peter's. So, Pope Francis did certainly was very cozy with that environmentalist movement and the spirituality that sort of underlies it. Yeah.
Yes. So if paganism, if witchcraft, because Joshua's question, I mean, it was a very important question, is it fringe?
Yeah.
Is it fringe? Now, maybe Wiccans are fringe in your community. Maybe. They're fringe here. I know that's not going to be the dominant position. The worldview, that underlying perspective of nature is what we venerate, nevertheless lands firmly within our entire Western milieu. I'm going to give you one more example, and I'm going to ask if you could tell me which Christian denomination or which Christian movement this would be from. The book is entitled Earth Trek, Celebrating and Sustaining God's Creation. They have, I'm just going to read you a couple of points from it. These connections to the rest of creation forge a kinship between all creatures. The birds, animals, trees, mountains, and rivers are, in a sense, our brothers and sisters. Then it gives a meditation from the David Suzuki Foundation. We are the earth through the plants and animals that nourish us. We are the rains and the oceans that flow through our veins. We are the breath of the forest and the land, and it goes on and on and on like this. Okay, all right, and then at the very end of the book, it gives you a number of action points for your congregation to engage in. Now, these are not Wiccans, these aren't pagans in the classical sense of what we're talking about. And they have it in bold so you get the point. This week, make an offering to the earth in the form of a prayer or some other gift. Any ideas? Any ideas where that comes
Which denomination? Christian
from?
denomination?
Yep,
Or
which Christian
yeah,
group? Yep.
I would say the Episcopal Communion.
Yeah, well, it would fit, wouldn't it? I know. How about the Mennonite Central Committee? This is from the Mennonite community.
Mennonites. Yeah.
Mennonites.
Yeah,
Okay.
this comes from the
Well, it'd be
Mennonite
the
Central
liberal
Committee.
Mennonites,
Yeah,
right? There's
right. There's
conservative
branches.
Mennonites too,
Oh
right?
yeah,
There's different branches.
absolutely,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, but it
Yeah.
demonstrates again that worldview, this worldview permeation that connects
Yeah.
from a worldview perspective. It still is a spiritual point of view that favors
Yeah.
or fits within that neo-pagan perspective,
You know,
even though they would never
Joshua,
ever call themselves that way. Yeah.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think what we are, what a lot of us in the apologetics, you know, I mean, on apologetics or doing apologetics or public theology, a lot of what we oftentimes will just call progressive Christianity
Yeah.
really is this. It's
Yeah.
sort of earth worship. It's pagan. It's pagan religion. It's pagan earth religion, with a Christian with Christian veneer and language, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Which raises
Okay.
the question
That's
of whether or
interesting.
not, like, you know, we might say one way to think about Romans 1:18 through to 32 is we are all natural pagans in a sense until we are saved and redeemed from our paganism.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This
Maybe.
is very fascinating. I mean, you're making a lot of paganism, and so I didn't actually expect to go this direction, but okay. So we agree that we all agree there's apologetics movement. If we're going to be really effective and like engage with the culture around us a bit more, we need to move away from disproving disbelief and move more toward diagnosing rival spiritualities, ideologies, and worldviews, and the like. Okay, I think we agree with that, and we can say more about that. I didn't expect so much attention on paganism. So I think you made the point earlier, Anthony, that I think that's interesting. That from a worldview perspective, paganism, neo humanism or New Ageism, whatever you want to call it, kind of this monistic frame worldview, are really at one level the same. And I see what you're saying. I think there's some validity to it. I distinguish them. I mean, I kind of distinguish them in the sense that paganism is far more earthy, earth-centric, earth-worshipping, and what I think of as at least some version, there is overlap, but some versions of cosmic humanism are, there's certainly a kind of metaphysical reality that is transcendent, higher, that some of these guys, especially in the Eastern world, are trying to access. It's not identical to nature. It's certainly distinct from nature. And it's even a being, as it were, that is ultimate being, transcendent being, that is not nature. So, I mean, I kind of see those as distinct.
Yeah,
But
no, I
what do you
understand.
think about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, no, this is tricky, and I think there are in-house debates amongst pagans how to work out their ontology. Graham Harvey, for example, is an animist, right? And he very much wants to ground paganism in this earth, this actual earth that we live on, even though he understands that the pagan worldview could be expanded, of course, to the entire known universe, in that it's still all the same stuff, right? but he feels that we are children of the earth. So what we primarily want to focus our veneration on, our worship, our attention is this actual planet, Mother Earth. But, it does seem that could, again, as we've come to know more and more about our universe, that could certainly be expanded to the entire cosmos, right? Especially if you think it's all everything. So maybe the better word is nature, capital N, divine nature, right? And then where is your focus? Is it on the cosmos, divine nature, or is it on the earth? But then I've seen some neo-pagans now expanding their understanding of the cosmos. There's a contemporary analytic philosopher of religion by the name of Eric Steinhardt, who wrote a Cambridge Elements book, Contemporary Pagan Philosophy, who adopts David Lewis's modal realism about possible worlds, that all possible worlds are real worlds, and we just live in the actual one, but all these other logically possible worlds are, and I'm no metaphysician here, so if I screw something up, correct me, but are real concrete worlds. And Steinhardt has this then even more expanded understanding of divine nature, even though it's all nature. So it's still not, but it's still not transcendent. It's big because it would include all logically possible worlds, right? He's saying they're real. And they're, for Steinhardt, I think he's getting to the point they're accessible even from our world, okay? But that's still not the transcendence of theism. But it is certainly quite a expanded sort of imminent, expanded yet still imminent view of nature, right? So in Steinhardt's view, things like all of the gods of the pagan pantheons, and even the creatures that we would think are mythological, dwarves, elves, whatever, they can be actual or real. They can be real entities, but they exist in other possible worlds. Okay. So when the pagan maybe goes through his ecstatic ritual or practices magic and has something like an experience of the god or that he or she is worshiping, Thor or Odin or whatever, if you're a Nordic pagan, you're actually having a real experience, an experience of a real being. It's not a hallucination per se. You can have an experience of this real being, Thor, who exists in that possible world where Thor is embodied, is more material than Thor is in this world. So we're getting constructs, construals of that are a little more robust understandings of nature than just nature being the earth. This earth that we have. So I don't know. There's going to be multiple sort of, yeah.
Yeah. What you're saying, Anthony, is really interesting because in the psychedelic world, doing DMT, doing an ayahuasca ceremony, the DMT kicks in. All of a sudden, you're approached by entities. The entities have download information. The entities come before you, even including the concepts of the gods and the goddesses are all of a sudden before you. The machine elves, the elves are there, and they're dialoguing with a sense of sentient intelligence. And it's crazy, but all of a sudden you land firmly in that realm as well, which kind of fits in, okay, well, it's a portal, and that's how it's all of a sudden being described, a portal to another spiritual dimension, another spiritual reality, another natural world that's only accessible via some spiritual tool, and DMT offers that tool.
Yeah, and then as Christians, it would be up to us. Like, how do we want to interpret this biblically? Are these interactions with actual spirits, unclean spirits? If go with sort of the Michael Heiser, the Elohim, these powers and principalities that God has created, and so on and so forth. or are they just hallucinations in the mind? I think we could go either way as how to interpret those.
And I think
But
it's
a
probably
lot of
both are happening.
neo-pagans will, yeah. But the neo-pagans will argue amongst themselves. They'll be happy also. Some will say, these aren't real in the ontological sense. But I think more and more are open to the idea that these are real. These have independent existence from the human mind.
When we start thinking about like classical theism and how much classical theism resonates with, say, theistic Hinduism and even Buddhism, theistic conceptions of Buddhism. So that's a much deeper kind of metaphysical issue. Certainly in the south of America, you have this problem in Roman Catholic practice of syncretism. That's obviously been a problem, and you might think it's not as much of a problem here, but from what we're hearing, what you guys are saying, certainly there seems to be growing trends in that direction in various permutations, and however we make sense of that, both negatively, positively, how we assess that. Yeah, I think there's a lot there to explore. Yeah, I think you answered it. I kind of want to ask a different question briefly, because this will help round out and bring us to I think some kind of closure today. What's the attraction here? Why is it growing? We're talking about enchanted nature. In apologetics, Christianity, we need to move in the direction of not focusing so much on why is Christianity rejected as true or seen as false, but why is it just not attractive? Why is it insufficiently enchanted? There's a kind of attraction, appeal, and enchantment to maybe to variants of neo-paganism, or maybe to variants, if we're going to make a distinction, to kind of cosmic humanism. Maybe Christianity doesn't supply, I'm not saying it does, I'm a Christian, but maybe it doesn't supply the answers, or at least we're not giving good answers.
Okay, awesome question. And the question is why is paganism growing the way it is? Why is there this sense of attraction to it? There's a number of points. It is a motive. It provides a feeling. In the ritual, in the connection, in your purpose, you feel there's this connection. And that's a very powerful motive right there. It does provide purpose. It does provide meaning. It acts as now a counter-narrative. But as a counter-narrative, you have emotionally brought yourself into it. That's part of it. The other part of it is it lands in the problem of how we as Christians have dealt with questions of faith and questions of spirituality. I cannot tell you how many times I run into former Christians at pagan events. In fact, for a while, some of my colleagues were joking that if it wasn't for Baptists, there would be no Wiccans, because there's so many within the pagan community that come out of the church. So many. It basically is the place for lost sheep. Why? It boils down to a few different things. Of course, people say, well, it's rebellion. Yeah, that's part of it. Absolutely. But it also lands in issues, questions of faith. We hear this repeatedly. I had hard questions of faith. I would go to my pastor, I'd go to my minister, and he would tell me, don't worry, don't question, just believe. That doesn't land, that doesn't fit. Or they had some type of spiritual experience. I had footsteps coming down the hallway. That happened to me all through my teenage years. I would have an entity at the end of my bed. I would go to my youth pastor, I'd go to my minister, I'd go to my priest. I'd tell them this, and they'd be saying to me, it's just in your head. Wrong answer. Then where will we find people going if we don't provide answers? If we're not at least willing to say, maybe I don't have the answer, let me work it with you. Let me work it through with you. And then one more area where it lands, and this hurts. There's a pagan author that I follow. I've gone to many of his lectures. I've had some conversations with him one-on-one. And he makes the case, he's a former youth leader, and he makes a case that, look, Christianity, you have made the resurrection of a dead man boring. And it's like, how in the world can you make the resurrection of a dead man boring? This should be the most transformative, the most exciting, the most joyous thing imaginable. But if the church is unwilling to even accept that this is something that should drive us to having that joy and literally being excited about it, where it transforms our life, maybe it's just a myth and it doesn't land in reality. I'm going to look for something that's going to be emotive. I'm going to look for something that's going to be ecstatic. I'm going to look for something that's going to be transformative. And he found that in Wicca. And he's like, you Christians, you have made the, I mean, this is just, it still boggles me. But he's right. You have made the resurrection of a dead man a boring subject. Wow. Wow. How do I wrestle with this now? So these are some of the things, and not all, obviously, I mean, that kind of percolated. What I'm excited about with this conversation and the continuation of this conversation is we're looking at the nuances of paganism, cosmic humanism, secularism as well. Whereas so often in the Christian world, we don't look at the nuances. We don't even know that the nuances exist. We only look at it from either a fear factor or we claim that it's irrelevant. That's typically how we run with this. But there's nuances to the pagan community that are as deep as human nature itself. And so as we wrestle through this, I'm hoping that those nuances come through. And then as we work through what an apologetics looks like, we look at this then as opportunity to address the nuance, to address where they are at as an individual, and then be able to offer the counter, which is real. The creator or the creation, which way do we go?
That wasn't pre-written, was it?
No.
That was just right off the top of your head. That was really good.
Well,
Yeah.
That's your sermon for right now that you're going to go preach at the Bible church.
That's right. Yeah, I might have to take that and preach that on Sunday. Yeah.
Awesome. That's funny.
No, that was good. I think that's a good place to end.
Well, thank you, John.
I think
Sorry for the technical problems, but thank you.
That's
Problem.
right.
so.
All right.
We'll plan on next week. I guess we can. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, this is good.
This is good.
We'll see you next week.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Excellent.
All right, guys. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Theology and Ethics podcast of the Kirkwood Center. Please take a moment to leave a review on your podcast app of choice. If this episode made you think of someone you know, please share it with them. If you want to get in touch with the Kirkwood Center, you can call or text us at 909-493-7799 or send us an email at contact@kirkwoodcenter.org. You can also visit our website at kirkwoodcenter.org. If you want to join the theology and ethics conversation and see more content, you can find the Kirkwood Center on Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube and Substack. Until next week, my name is Anthony Costello. Thank you for listening to the Kirkwood Center podcast, and we look forward to hearing from you. Until then, God bless.